For those who tune in here in America, good evening. And while for our guests joining us from Shanghai, China, good morning. Diane and David, thanks for being here with us today. My name is Chen. I'm a moderator tonight. I'm a student at Harvard pursuing a master's degree in school leadership. Currently, I'm also interning at a Cambridge-based private school, which is also like joining in a concerted efforts combating the COVID-19 crisis. As we all know, in the US, the COVID-19 situation is apparently escalating, and the US becomes the first country reporting 100,000 confirmed coronavirus cases. Needless to say, the pandemic is afflicting people across the entire nation and globally. Again, against this background, today we're very lucky and glad to have two distinguished guests from the Pao School joining us today to share their thoughts on how to combat this crisis. Like Larry Bacall, the president of Harvard, once said, "The world needs courage and creativity and intelligence to beat virus." Let's welcome our guests to share with us their thoughts on the measures to combat this virus. And they will probably first give us a speech titled "The Strategic Lessons from Within China for US Schools in Responding to COVID-19. Of course, first of all, please introduce yourself a little bit and also the Pao schools. David, why don't you go first?
Kevin, thank you. And good evening to everybody. Good morning here in a very wet Shanghai. It's raining a lot. Just a quick introduction to our school and to ourselves. It's Diane. Diane, quickly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Diane. I attended colleges in the United States and got my master's degree from Kellogg School of Management. Came back to China in 2007. Has joined Pao 2 years ago.
And my name's David Mansfield. I'm the executive headmaster of Pao School. Before that, I was head of an international school in Beijing and a couple of schools in the UK. I'm British, but I can't, be held accountable for that. And so we are really pleased to be able to have the opportunity of sharing our experiences and really want to pass on our deepest sympathy and support for everybody going through it there in the States. It's been difficult here in China, but been very well handled by the authorities. And as a result, there are no new cases now in Shanghai and haven't been for a while. Only cases of COVID-19 in Shanghai are those that have been brought back by returnees. And as you probably know, as of yesterday, or the day before yesterday, all internationals were no longer able to come back into China. So China is closing the virus down in a very effective format. And also has been able to do a pretty good job on the delivery of an education service to the children after the school is closed. And we'll say more about that later on. But it's a very interesting learning curve. Now, our school is what's called a bilingual school. So about 50-50 in English and in Chinese. Our aim is quite deliberately to develop the whole person, not necessarily in contrast to Chinese schools, because a lot of Chinese schools are doing the same sort of thing now, but it's a very sort of holistic, child-centered education, similar to the sort of thing you'd find in an independent school in the States or the UK. We also want to make sure that we really embed Chinese foundations so our students know what it means to be Chinese, as well as being able to function effectively in an international context. So we follow a curriculum which is by law a Chinese curriculum. All Chinese students, and about 75% of ours are Chinese, have to follow the Chinese curriculum. But we integrate on top of that elements of international curricula as well in an approach to try and get the two aims of our vision, international and Chinese, fulfilled. Students come from all over the world. A lot of them, if you were to walk into a class, would appear to be Chinese ethnically. And as I say, a lot of them are from China. But a lot of returning Chinese with international passports, or from mixed families. We do have a number of expats as well who are committed to their children being brought up bilingual. So it's a pretty varied mix. In year one, we probably have about 50-50 international and Chinese in the cohort. Our teachers equally are about 50-50. The Chinese side obviously taught by Chinese PRC staff, the others taught by internationals, mostly from the US and the UK, but from other English-speaking nations as well. And of course, this is a real issue for us and for many international schools because the COVID virus broke out during Chinese New Year, when many of our international teachers were overseas. Getting them back into country has been a real challenge. Now we've got about 97% of our staff back, which is very, very good. So it means that when our school will reopen, we're in a position to be able to kick off again.
That's great. Could you share with us the timeline of COVID-19 in Shanghai? I know at the very beginning, the COVID-19 crisis kind of emerged during the Spring Festival, when all the students actually have a chance to go home and to stay at home. How did you, and until now, that's been a lot of weeks and months. So could you share with us the timeline of the COVID-19, how you guys at the YK Pao School deal with this crisis?
Sure, thank you, Kevin. Let me take you through the timeline that we went through in the past few weeks. There were rumors about coronavirus earlier on in December and early January, but in general, the public wasn't paying attention to it. For China, January 20th is the turning point, because this is the day when a nationally renowned doctor came out and said the disease is the transmission of the disease is human to human. So that has set out a national panic. And January 21st is the Wuhan lockdown. At that point, the whole nation is approaching Chinese New Year. January 25th is the Chinese New Year. In Shanghai, this timeline that we're going to take you through is happening specifically in Shanghai. This is the environment that Pao School lives in. January 24th, Shanghai government announced a national a level 1 response level. And then going on to January 26th, the government announced the school will not start earlier than February 17th. So I know a lot of you were talking with Kevin earlier, school has just shut down, there is a target starting date, but what is going to happen, as what we have experienced, is things are changing all the time. The disease is developing rapidly, the spread, as well as the government responses. So one challenge that we have, and David will explain, is the constant changing of government regulations and that impact it has on our school operation. So for example, the start date has changed quite a few times, as you can see on the timeline. We have to keep on adjusting our expectations in terms of our operation, as well as communication to our families, our staff, and the community in a time of change when we don't know exactly what will happen down the road. So going down this timeline, a few days later, government announced again, school will not start no earlier than end of February. And this is when the 14-day quarantine kicked in. Up until this point, if you come to Shanghai, there is no required quarantine. February 24th is when the government said people who come from high-risk areas are subject to a 14-day quarantine. And this high-risk area is a definition that's constantly changing. Every day, the government revisited, and at that point, it was local threat. So provinces and city names comes on and off the list. And our school, what we have to do is there is a daily report that goes into the government about the status of our employees as well as students, and that has to be adjusted daily so government knows where we stand. And fast forward to now, obviously, as you know, all the international countries are on the quarantine list. February 15th, this is when government started using a tracking system with an app. So everyone comes in, has to register their information and get the red, yellow, and green code. Green means you're okay, red means you need to be quarantined. February 17th is for the government, as they have announced before, online learning start in all Shanghai public schools. At this point, it's do all you can. Everyone was trying to use different softwares to deliver the online curriculum. March 1st is another key day for Shanghai schools. This is when pre-recorded sessions offered by Shanghai Education Commission goes on air. So for public schools, if they follow the compulsory curriculum, students can tune to different TV stations and the class will be broadcasted by a select few of expert instructors. So what the schools are doing, the public schools, is the student watch the pre-recorded sessions and then they have discussions later on. So that format in all public schools is consistent throughout. But obviously, Pao School is a private school, and we'll explain later what we did in this setting. Fast forward to March 23rd, things are improving in Shanghai locally. So as of March 23rd, Shanghai has downgraded the response level to emergency response level 2. At this point, the threat is perceived to come from overseas. And as some of you may be aware, Chinese has cut down the outbound and inbound international flights, as well as restricted all foreign nationals from coming into China.
Great. As you were going through the timeline of the COVID-19, I have 2 questions related to that. So are all schools required to report and the updates to the government? And also, on what platform has YK Pao School down, or all the citizens down the codes of the color?
Well,
all
yeah.
right, let me rephrase.
No, just to answer your questions quickly, all schools have to report because all citizens have to report. Yeah, so private or public would need to make a report through to the Education Bureau. And in terms of what platform, it's largely on Alipay. So yeah, if you want to go into a bar or to a restaurant after they've reopened, you have to demonstrate that you've got a green code on your Alipay mini program which runs within it. It's a really impressive system. Another great example of how Chinese technology is way ahead of the globe in terms of being able to register everybody. All sorts of issues to do with personal data and so on, but at the same time, in a crisis like this, it's a fantastic way of making sure that everybody has been processed. And if you're not processed, you don't go into a building.
Yeah, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, I'll quickly take you through Pao School's response. As I mentioned before, at the point of the outbreak, we're approaching Chinese New Year. So here is a few key milestones for our school. The first letter from Pao School went out on January 20th. This is coincide with the outbreak and the national panic. This is, and the letter from Executive Headmaster, which is David, is to inform the community of what's going on and the school's preparations. January 23rd is our last day of the semester. This is when everyone leaves campus. And as David will explain later, this creates challenges because a lot of our staff and students are overseas because of the Chinese New Year. We kicked back in right during the Chinese New Year break. The first letter from David informing school closures until February 17th went out on January 27th. So it's right a few days after Chinese New Year. Our online learning started February 10th as previous schedule. This was our first day of school. And as of yesterday, we're approaching the mid-semester mark. So our middle school and high school have started distributing the report cards.
Yeah, we basically have not missed a day's schooling. As soon as our term started, we went online and we've continued online, I think getting better and better at it week on week. Just finished our 7th week. Next week will be our 8th week. And then we're taking a short break before we move into the second half of the semester.
Speaking of moving online, so how smooth was the transition from in-person learning to remote learning? And were the teachers prepared to make that transition?
Right. Well, this is the nub of the whole thing. I think the first thing to say is that, that this whole coronavirus is a massive disruptor, and a massive disruptor. It's creating the biggest online experiment in the history of education. And as a result, school after school, teacher after teacher is going through, without wanting to try and make a positive out of it, because obviously it's a horrid situation, it's an incredible learning curve for every educator. You'll be aware that during the Second World War, a terrible experience, but coming out of it was the mass production of penicillin, the development of plastic surgery, and obviously nuclear fission as well. So massive outcomes coming from disruptors, and that's exactly what's happening here. And obviously, individual schools will start from where they are. And you probably don't know, but there was a survey done by the OECD in 2018 that reviewed all the participant jurisdictions and asked teachers, were they comfortable teaching online? And interestingly enough, some of the best schools on the PISA ratings, schools like Finland, had returns of about 20%. In other words, because they teach an incredible amount face-to-face, they're not very confident online. The area that came out top of that survey in 2018 was Shanghai, with 63% of teachers saying they were ready to teach online. So I think Shanghai has a massive advantage over the rest of the globe. The US figure was 45% in 2018. So you've got to start with where you are. Most Shanghai schools have a one-to-one policy. Most have got very good broadband facilities. Most have got learning platforms already embedded. Most of them have got curriculum that's already on those learning platforms, which can then be shared. Most kids will have email addresses which they can connect direct to their teachers, and most teachers will have online facilities that are aligned to the classes that they teach. So there are huge advantages that we already had. Many of our classrooms have got smart TVs which have their own interactive software on them already. So we probably started at Pao School a little bit ahead of the game, and we're by no means the furthest ahead. There are some fantastic examples in China. But I think because of the power of technology and the funding structures behind education, particularly in the private sector, there was a huge benefit that we had to start with. So the first piece of advice is start with your basics. And that's exactly what we did. We do have a learning platform called Pao School Learning, which is an American product, and many schools in the States will be using Pao School. And we use that for all the core work. As you're probably aware, there are two types of approach to online work. One is synchronous, which is where you have some sort of video link, where you have either a product like Zoom. We use a Chinese product called XY Link, but it's the same idea. We're using Zoom here. And this is a great product for being able to take an entire class. In fact, Zoom allows you to break it down into subgroups as well. So you can have group work going on within the class. Teacher can see every face and can work with the children. Can do a backdrop as we are of a PowerPoint. So a lesson can go on pretty much as it would do. And in our middle school and our high school, that's exactly how we're doing it. We've reduced length of lessons a little bit, but we're still delivering essentially the same lesson, but with the structure and backbone of that lesson put on to Pao School Learning, so the work can then be followed up in the student's own time to connect to it. In the primary school, there are regulations that allow only a certain amount of online direct teaching. And also it's much more difficult to do online teaching synchronously with a collection of 6-year-olds because they're less mature, they need more direct support, and parents have to be engaged with that in order to make it effective. So there's less of that we do at primary level. We do more asynchronous learning at that level, which is where you put your learning onto your platform and embed everything that you need into that piece of learning. So the tasks that need to be performed with timelines, with assessment, where the assessment must be sent, when it must be sent, videos that can be watched, questions on those videos. Very often there will be an embedding of maybe a headshot or a piece of teaching done by a teacher. And again, because we're an Apple school, every one of our teachers knows how to use formats like QuickTime Player or Photo Booth. They know about the Shift command 4/5s. So you're able to do video shots of your screen top, embed them onto Pao School Learning so they can be used by students. So I think we were in a reasonably good place. But that said, there's still been a massive learning curve in order to take it forward. The other thing where we were at an advantage was we already had quite a lot of subscription accounts. So we already had a number of online products which were embedded into our systems that we were able to use as part of the online learning. So things like GoFormative, which is an AI-generated marking system where you can set activities, they can be marked on some sort of quizzes. We already use things like Padlet for shared documents. We have 365, Microsoft 365 already used across the school and every student. So you could do things like shared documents. So kids could be working together on shared pieces of work, which they could then share with their peers and with their teacher. Quizlet is very uniformly used, setting up question and answers to see whether learning has been embedded. So quite a lot is already in place in our school, which we were able to build on and turn into a different form of platforms. I'll stop there for questions and discussion.
Yeah, that sounds very, very comprehensive measures. But let me play the devil's advocate. What about classes like drama classes, like PE class? And how do you guys cope with that situation?
Okay, well, the priority within certainly the primary school, the compulsory phase, remember China has a compulsory phase, which is year 1 through 9, was to cover the core curriculum, which is the academic curriculum. And that's where we prioritize. So specialist subjects, the art, the music, the drama, the PE, more difficult to do. We've made provision for all of those. And obviously in the middle and the high school, we actually taught those lessons. Now, PE lessons are slightly difficult, but you know, there have been, using Zoom, opportunities to do collaborative work in drama. Artwork can be set as individual projects. In the primary school, we've actually added in a 2-week extra into our summer program, which we're offering to parents, which will be an all arts-based, PE-based curriculum to make up for a lot that was missing during this period of remote learning. So you do have to recognise as you evaluate your curriculum where the gaps are, and I'll come back to that in a minute when we talk about feedback loops, but to make sure you make full provision for the entirety of the curriculum. But as I said earlier, it's a lot easier to do those things higher up the school than lower down the school. And you know, we've got students that are sharing exercise routines, which they're working on, so other students can share them. Teachers are sharing those around as well, to try and keep the school healthy, as well as academically on stream. Shall I say a little bit about how we manage the operation as well?
Yeah, I'm new to Zoom too. So Lloyd has a question. How do you create opportunities for social interaction, learning through peer socialization for students at the primary school level, middle school level, and upper school?
Right, it's a really, really good question. And obviously, nobody is trying to pretend that online learning is the universal solution. I think one of the questions that's been asked by many people, and you know, lots of heads are writing think pieces and so on all sorts of social media about, does this mark the end of schools? Are we going to see a transformation towards an online learning community that will replace traditional bricks and mortar schools? And I think we all know the answer to that question is no. There will remain schools. I think what we will take from this experience is there's a lot of the first level of education, which is getting knowledge embedded, memory testing, you know, getting long-term memory shaped. But we know full well the social interactionist theories, and also the other purposes of school, which is about socialization, about community building, about character building, and so on. That sort of stuff remains very, very important, and will happen within bricks and mortar schools into the long-term future. But for me, what we have been able to do is to use some of the online features to have small group discussion.
I forgot I have another online.
Yeah, to make sure we do get some connectivity between students. I think Diane would maybe be able to share her own son's experience, but you know, a lot of these kids are working with 3 machines in front of them. They've got the computer where they're doing the online work. They've got a laptop, maybe where they're looking at some research material, and they've also got their WeChat going as well, where they're talking to their fellow classmates about issues that are going along. They may have another one which has actually got a games console as well, but we won't talk about that. That's another issue altogether. So what they're doing is they're using their very high levels of proficiency in terms of social media to do the connectivity alongside the learning process. And most of these good formats have got discussion rooms. So we use Pao School Learning, which has the discussion forum. And one of the basic learning strategies that you use is to teach a little bit and then ask the students to make a contribution in response to that onto the discussion forum. And you can see whether or not the student is writing and responding that way. So there's a direct relationship. It may not always be face-to-face verbally, but it's certainly in written form using the discussion forum format. And you probably know on Zoom, you can create subgroups. So if we're discussing a novel, for example, and there's a bit of formal teaching with some then response, you can then break down into 2s and 3s, discuss 2 or 3 questions, and then feed back to the group about what that discussion has found. And actually, in some ways, the management of those structures is a lot easier using an online forum than it is in a classroom situation, because you just simply manage it and using the technology. So a lot of these things can be developed, but I don't think any of us are suggesting they are going to replace the impact of a face-to-face classroom experience.
Sure. So you touch upon the topic of management. So how did you manage parents' expectations and concerns about remote learning? So because traditionally in Chinese people's parents, in the parents' mindset, that proper learning should take place like in a in-person format, right? Offline classrooms. So now everything's disrupted. So how did you manage their expectations?
Right. I think if you come from a very traditional learning pedagogy, then parents are deeply concerned because they think that learning happens when the teacher teaches and the children write it down and learn it. That actually is a very important part of learning, but actually can still be replicated pretty well online. Teacher can teach, or materials can be provided. Children read in bed, are quizzed regularly and tested regularly to make sure that they've learnt it. So there's a lot of reassurance that comes through just showing the quality of what you're delivering. Now, and actually the interesting thing I said at the beginning, this is a massive disruptor. Most online learning projects that have happened to date have been unsupervised by parents because they happen when parents are at work. This one, of course, because parents are at home, they are watching almost step by step exactly what's happening. And so they're able to get a very quick feedback as to whether they think it's effective or otherwise. What we've done is we've done regular parent surveys on all 3 of our campuses. We have a middle school, a primary school, and a high school. And we've asked each parent to give feedback on how they think it's going, things that are going well, things that they think could be improved. And we've then worked very hard to communicate what we're doing to make up the deficiencies in the delivery. And we're getting satisfaction ratings that are getting progressively higher and higher as the weeks go by. It's now ending, we've just finished week 7, and probably some of our bigger concerns were in primary because of the difficulties of working with little ones. But even there, we begin to get some very significant increases in satisfaction ratings as parents recognize that we're working hard on creating a delivery. And the other thing, of course, is the students are getting much more used to working online. They've created their own disciplines of how they function, how they collect information, how they manage the online world in order to be able to facilitate learning. So I think the management thing is really about ongoing, just-in-time communication, listening, responding, demonstrating that you're changing processes. So for example, in primary, we've increased the amount of face-to-face teaching now. We doubled it the week before last, we're doubling it again next week. In order to increase the amount of contact time, because we find that's a more efficient way of working with the little ones, as long as it's broken down into very small bite-sized pieces with immediate response in order to make sure the students stayed engaged. So everybody's learning about how to develop the technology, but also how to develop a pedagogy within the technology that's going to be more effective. The management systems are making sure that people are satisfied at the client end, the parent end, and the student end, and that our middle leaders are working very hard on team planning with their teams, and that's also very important and can be done through Zoom and through, we use, the Chinese product is called XY Link, to use that to plan together collaboratively to put the material onto Pao School Learning so it can then be shared and used across all of the classes in that particular year group. So I think we're becoming more proficient at sharing best practice and making sure it's comprehensively established across the whole school. Remember, schools are about delivering not just excellence to one kid, but excellence to every kid. So that's been a very important part of what we've been trying to do. Into that, we've done quite a lot of accountability measuring. So our middle leaders and our senior leaders will be able to tap into the online learning programs. So I think it's very easy to join a class and to observe it from outside, to see what's going on, and to then give feedback, as well as some sense of measuring whether we're delivering what we're promising.
Yeah, and we got a question about the last bit, sorry. So why most students have those advantages, access to broadband, email, I guess YK Pao schools have students who might be on financial aid, or they have special needs, they are ADHD students. How would you ensure that you can support them too? Because they may have their own disadvantages and difficulties in learning.
Yeah, it's a really, really important question. And Pao School would probably only have a few students in that category. We estimate that in our primary and our middle school, it's probably about 5% that need to have their parents with them to make sure they work. And that number has come down from 10% probably to 5 or even lower in the middle school, as kids become a little bit more proficient and confident. A lot of the lack of engagement is just lack of confidence and uncertainty as to what to do. So the first week, a lot of complaints were the parents were forever being asked, what have I got to do? What have I got to do? Because the children are sort of like blind panic in the face of all these instructions as to how they move forward. But as they learn to accommodate it and teachers become better at setting out work in an easy, more digestible fashion, it becomes more accessible. I think what you're talking about is the pastoral side and sort of the special application of need. We try and touch base every day with our students in some form of class meeting. So every child has a chance to talk to a tutor or a homeroom teacher to make sure that they're okay. And for those that are really struggling, we then do one-on-one interviews. For a homeroom teacher to do regular one-on-ones with a class of 25, it's actually quite difficult to do, as well as doing their teaching program. So we don't do a large number of those, but we do them as and when we see problems arising. Now, of course, one of the other issues, because everything's coming back electronically, we're able to chronicle quite well what's working, what's not working, where students are failing to deliver on work, or work is at a lower level. And so the tutors and the teachers can then begin to intervene either with an email or with sometimes they would just send an online message, or even communicate one-on-one, face-to-face to meet that particular need. We also have professionals in counselling, learning support, who are working in the school, and they're doing exactly what they would have been doing if they were in school. Online.
Sorry, David,
Yeah.
if I could add one more thing. I think Kevin mentioned earlier on about broadband access. We're fortunate that all of our students do have it. Broadband access is readily available in Shanghai. We do have some students who were traveling, because remember, this is during Chinese New Year. Some students are overseas. So the challenges with broadband access is not with Shanghai-based staff or students, but with those who are traveling. And actually, we have a few students who are in the US as well. So because of the synchronous learning, they have to get up at night and catch up with the Chinese time zone. But otherwise, access was not an issue. And actually, in the broader scope in Shanghai, government has done a survey with every single student about their broadband access, and they offered free broadband or free upgrade for students who didn't have proper access, to enable every student access to online learning during this period of time.
Yeah, we talk a lot about how to support the current students. what about the potential prospective students? As a management piece, like how does the COVID-19 impact admission and recruitment of new students? Because I'm very interested, because I'm learning how to manage schools, and admissions a vital part of the management department.
We've got a massive red herring here.
Well, admissions is very challenging. We are at this because all the at the same time with the school closure, all group gatherings are banned by the government as well. So for regular admissions event, you need to do info sessions. You need to do different programs. You need to have the campus open. Those are all off limits at this point. We have primarily been using phone calls. Although the campus is closed, our hotlines are still open, so families could call in with questions. Our open apply, our website, our emails are available to families as well. So if they have questions, they could still reach us. We're still in touch with families who have already applied. Our admission staff are calling them to check on their status. But otherwise, these face-to-face meetings are not happening. We're waiting for campus to reopen so we could resume our regular admissions program.
Great. So in this time of uncertainty, communication is the key. Like communication is everything. So why don't you share with us how do you guys engage parents and students via different communication methods, tools, and platforms?
Sure. Now on the screen, you're going to see a org chart, so to say, about our communication structure. Now, what's unique about our structure is because we're a bilingual school, there are, at the time, especially in the early days of the pandemic outbreak, there was a lot of communications from the government, all in Chinese, and it's all very urgent. So those information needs to be quickly delivered. So this is why the structure is set up as such. On top is the board. We now at this point have weekly board meetings, so we can go through urgent issues with the board and make decisions. On the left-hand side is the senior management committee. Those are made up of David, the principals from all campuses, and functional heads, so deputy heads like me. And then there's the Chinese response team. So what happens is if the government has mandate, those information are quickly disseminated from the Chinese language-based team to the board, to senior management committee, and to the campus leadership. At the same time, the decision is made at the senior management and the board level, and those decisions are passed down to each campus-based leadership. And this will go further down to the teachers, to the PTAs, to our staff and admin staff. In times of crisis, it's very important to keep clear communication. So because of it, especially at the early days of the outbreak, so roll back a few weeks, between end of January to mid-February, mid to end of February, our communication frequency was very high. So from David's office, he will be sending out letters to the community and to our staff weekly. And on top of it, our principal would also send letters. So David's communication will be broad stroke. School is closed until February 17th, and each campus will then communicate to their parent community about decisions down to that campus, how that will be executed. So throughout this crisis, we've tried to keep information transparent and prompt so everyone is on the same page. The challenge that everyone's going to face in the COVID-19 crisis is things are changing all the time. There are times that we're not sure what's going to happen as well. And it's important to be transparent. That has worked for us. So, sorry,
and I was going to say, I don't know, most schools will have critical incident plans or some sort of critical incident management policy. And essentially, I had said at the beginning, this is great PD in terms of how you do online learning. It's great PD in how management systems need to operate effectively in terms of fast decision-making, processing data, and communicating that data to different stakeholders efficiently and well. And as a result, our leadership team, we meet twice a week. The agenda is basically driven by the events of the day, so it's in that sense quite reactive, though there is some proactive viewing into the future. The board, actually, they are very, very, very overseeing of what we're doing to make sure that we get it right. In the context of the virus, people's health, but also in terms of compliance with Chinese policy at a time of crisis, you can't make mistakes. So this system has been very tightly put together. Minutes, regular meetings, clear communication, and creating, and I suppose this is probably more important than anything else, creating a culture of compliance, not because of some sort of kowtowing, but because we all need to apply policy and we need to do it effectively, and we need to do it today. And I think we've been able to get that into our staff, which is why we've got 97% of our staff back, while we've got nearly 98% of our students back in Shanghai. So I think it's been quite an effective means of getting the message across and coordinating our teams.
Yeah, getting a message across is super important. And the communication sometimes is also two-way street. So what kind of feedback have you guys received from the parents? I know in my school right now, some Chinese parents are very worried because the stigmatization trend on the internet, and they are very worried about their kids' mental health, psychological health, and apparently we got an audience here post some questions similar to that, and I will read it out. So fear and anxiety about COVID-19 is very overwhelming and cause strong emotions in children. What are some specific actions your school is taking to support students in difficult times? So to wrap up, the students' emotional health. What kind of feedback have you got from the parents, and how did you guys support that?
I think there are a number of things. Number one, we have regular communication, and it's positive communication. It's trying to, not so much jolly them along, but keep the children focused, make sure they're not isolated, giving them good feedback and good opportunity to connect with one another and their peers, to create that sense of normality. And I think that is very important in a time when, where there's a lot of time to sit and worry and to read social media feeds and begin to think the world is a terrible and scary place. The other thing, and I think this is very important, is like everything in schools, it's to do with culture. Just about everything that happens in a school comes from the leadership. And I think we've tried as a leadership team, and certainly as a governing board and as founders, to give a positive message in everything that we write, to show and to portray good stories of successes that we're doing well. A lot of the social media feeds that Diane, is the director of marketing, is putting out are to show the impact of what we're doing. And that's not just trying to show off, it's more to raise morale and to build confidence in the system that everything is going well. I think we've been significantly helped in China because the government has done such a great job of dealing with the problem. So a lot of the fear has been directly challenged and dealt with. As a result, I think a lot of the deep set uncertainty has been removed. In terms of what I would do if it were a lot worse, and certainly what we did do when the outbreak was at its height, and what I would suggest you would do in the States at this time, is just to give very clear, simple and regular advice to students as to what they can do to protect themselves and what parents can do to protect themselves. I think one of the things that in my own country is that the government is having to confront is flippancy. In other words, students not taking it seriously and as a result exposing themselves. The other side, of course, is massive fear. And I think we need to put the message out that, look, if you do the right things, if you listen to advice, if you follow the collective instructions, all will be well. And we're going to get through this. There's a journey to travel. It's going to be tough, but we're going to get there. And that is all about leadership. And leadership at every level of the organization is, I think, a key part of a solution to this problem.
Part, let's talk about something related to the accountability. Kids can be demotivated staying at home, and they probably sometimes cannot catch up with the pace of learning. And so why don't you share with us how have teachers kept their students accountable and motivated in YK Pao schools?
Yes, I mean, again, let's not pretend that this is easy, and that is not an easy thing to do. There are some students in every catchment who are completely on side, and you know, they don't need any motivation. They're very independently motivated. And we know that a lot of Chinese students fall into that category. So it's actually a lot easier to do that work here in Shanghai than it would be in other parts of the world. I think we all know that one of the reasons why Shanghai, China, a lot of Asian countries do so well in international comparators is because the work culture and application is very high. So I think we do have that huge advantage. But a lot of it is, again, about simple school teaching. What is it that motivates a child? It's relationship building. It's making sure that they feel connected, that they feel somehow understood and listened to. And I think the feedback loops, both the surveys that we're doing on a weekly basis, but also the conversations that are had in the daily class time are helping students to feel connected to the school and cared for by the school. You know, as I say, when we begin to see students tailing off, we either have communication with parents to try and work with them on other solutions, or we work with them individually to try and help them along and to make them feel a little bit more supported. I think the other thing is just trying to break the work up, and so it doesn't become sort of an incessant slog, but there's fun stuff. You know, there's things to watch, there's games to play, there's breaking the activities up to make them a little bit more accessible, and in making sure that there's really good opportunities for collaborative work. So one student can help another student along. You know, most learning is based around theory. We know that one of the most important theories is the idea of proximal learning, that students do need to learn, work together and support one another together. And so setting that up within the systems is really important. If we just leave kids to independently work through a block of material that's sent them on an email, they just simply won't do it. You know, they'll drop off. They need to be encouraged. You need to break it down, short, punchy, easily digestible activities, moving on to the next, following it up with feedback, a little quiz to make sure it's embedded, returning to material again a little bit later to make sure it's been properly understood, and so on. So it's all those skills of decent pedagogy that are going to help to engage your students, which is why I think I said at the beginning of the piece, this is actually taking some of our teachers a lot more time to prepare than ever they had to when they were in class. We know that 9/10 of success in the classroom is preparation. If you prepare well, good materials, good resources, good pacing, and with good feedback opportunities, then you're going to overcome many of the handicaps. But I wouldn't want to minimize the reality of the question. I think it's a difficult one to work through.
Sure, and you touch upon the topic of parental engagement, which is vital. So what advice would you give to schools and school leaders if they want to engage meaningful and seamless parent engagement and parent involvement in helping the kids navigate the complexity of the situation?
Why don't you say it from a parent's perspective, and I'll top it up at the end.
Well, you know, because we're at week 9 now, so we could look back and see what has happened over time. So one thing I want to add to it is, I think exactly as you said, while we're in the school setting, the life is going on.